Airta.
Max Verstappen's career is far from over, and at the time of this episode going to air, we still don't know how far he might go. There seems to be no limit to what he can accomplish. Since he joined Formula One, he has mesmerized us with a great number of incredible performances, including his magnificent win under the rain at the 2024 Brazilian Grand Prix. But at the end of the 2016 season, his first one at Red Bull, he completely amazes everyone by his driving in very difficult conditions, again, under the rain, in Brazil. Verstappen has already one win on his record by this time, so this Grand Prix was not his coming out party. But his way of driving and how he overtook almost everyone during that race was simply astonishing. This is why the 2016 Brazilian Grand Prix is a race to remember. 2016 was the year when Nico Rosberg finally overcame the challenges presented by Lewis Hamilton. On his third attempt, Rosberg was able to beat his Mercedes teammate to win his first and only world title. 2016 was also the season when the F1 universe witnessed the emergence of a young phenom, Max Verstappen. The Dutch driver, son of ex-F1 driver Jos Verstappen, arrived at Red Bull from the sister team Toro Rosso for the Spanish Grand Prix in May. At the time, even though he had been noticed by all for his driving prowess, it was stunning to see a man this young, only 18 years of age, taking the place in a premium car. But the Red Bull team management was convinced that he was the future, and the future became reality way earlier than anyone could have expected, when Verstappen won the Spanish Grand Prix. This after Hamilton and Rosberg collided at the start of the race. After that stunning victory, the focus point of the championship remained the battle between the Mercedes teammates, a battle that intensified with each race. In the middle part of the calendar, Hamilton had won 6 races out of 7, but with Rosberg having wins in the first 4 races of the season, both drivers remained toe-to-toe for the championship. Later, Rosberg won 4 of 5 races between the Belgian and Japanese Grand Prix. He then understood that his chances to be world champion were as real as ever, with the possibility that he could be crowned if he simply finished second behind Hamilton in each of the last 4 races of the season. In the United States and the Mexican Grand Prix, that's exactly what happened. Now, as F1 was in Brazil for the penultimate race of the season, Rosberg, who had a 19-point lead on Hamilton, knew he was closer than ever to the championship that he dearly desired. But seeing the intense rain that was falling on the circuit on that Sunday morning, he knew that the race could take many different avenues, and that his quest for the title could easily suffer because of the stormy weather. Elsewhere, for the home crowd and for the Brazilian driver Felipe Massa, this race had a touching significance. At the time, he had announced that he would retire from Formula One at the end of the year. Therefore, this Grand Prix was to be the last time that Massa would race in front of his Brazilian fans. Everything that surrounded him that weekend would end up having special implications, especially true during the race itself. But what this Grand Prix would be remembered for is the performance of Max Verstappen. That day, the young Dutch driver would show the immensity of his skills. He would drive a race so splendid, the Brazilian Grand Prix could still be his most magnificent performance to date. It's a torrential rain that was falling on the circuit when F1 was about to race in Interlagos in 2016. The conditions were so bad that Romain Grosjean crashed his car while driving slowly, simply placing his car up on the grid. That was a half an hour before the scheduled start. When it became clear that the rain would not let up in time for the start, race director Charlie Whiting decided to play it safe. The race would begin under the safety car. All the drivers were starting on wet tires. While they ran behind the safety car, it was easy to notice that the drivers, even Hamilton, who was on pole, had trouble seeing. There was just too much water. Rosberg was second, right in front of Kimi Räikkönen on Ferrari, with Verstappen and Sebastian Vettel on the other Ferrari. Difficulties already affecting the Mercedes drivers, with Hamilton complaining that the water was entering his helmet, which one can understand would make driving even more hazardous. Rosberg was just as uncomfortable driving under that amount of rain. We could already sense that he will not attack on this day, that his main goal was to reach the finish line while collecting enough points to keep the lead for the championship. As many drivers explained to their teams how difficult it would be to race under these conditions, it was evident that Verstappen stood out from the rest of the pack. He was already looking for his ideal racing line. He often headed to the outside while running slowly, trying to find a place where he could surprise the more experienced drivers in front of him. On the 8th lap, the safety car entered and the race would finally begin. Hamilton grabbed a good start and kept the lead into the first corner. Rosberg was second, but it was behind him where things were interesting. Verstappen went outside the racing line and surprised Raikkonen right at the first corner. It was already a great maneuver for the young Dutch driver. He braked very late and was able to take the corner without trouble. Verstappen would go on to explain, "I was trying some different lines and I found a good one, so I knew that if Kimi was not going to take that line, I had a good chance of overtaking him." He was already showing his grit. Unlike many of his driver colleagues, except maybe Hamilton, he was not bothered by the intense rain that was falling on the circuit. Instead of seeing it as a difficult challenge, he saw it as an opportunity. What he did to Raikkonen was already an amazing maneuver. But there was so much more to come for the driver that the F1 universe was already seeing him as a phenom in the making. With the title in mind, Hamilton and Rosberg played it safe during the first lap of the race. But not Verstappen. As soon as he overtook Raikkonen, he went on to catch Rosberg. He was rapidly in pursuit of the German. Rosberg was already under attack. On lap 10, many cars had entered the pit to place their intermediate tires on, but not the leaders. Mercedes asked Rosberg if he was interested. His answer? No way. Too early. He then completed the fastest lap to prove his point. Around the same time, Vettel lost control of his Ferrari. It happened right at the moment he sped up to go to the start-finish line to begin his 11th lap. The red car running onto the grass, then spinning out. Vettel was able to keep his engine running and decided to head into the pit right afterwards. He was lucky to escape without being touched by another car. This could have been very dangerous. Even with that, the team put the intermediate tires on. Vettel would fall to 19th place. On lap 12, only after 4 laps of racing, Hamilton's lead was at 3.4 seconds on Rosberg and 6.6 seconds on Verstappen, while Raikkonen and Daniel Ricciardo on the other Red Bull were already 15 and 16 seconds behind. A lap later, Marcus Ericsson in Sauber would hit the wall, ending his day. The race was then placed under the safety car from that point on. Ericsson's car stalled right at the entrance of the pit lane. The race direction deciding to close it as a precautionary measure, but both Red Bull cars changed tires anyway. Verstappen had entered before the pit was closed, but not Ricciardo, who would be penalized. The safety car would leave on the 20th lap. Raikkonen then spun when he sped up along the pit lane. It was a very dangerous incident because everybody was coming at full speed behind him. The Ferrari hit the wall at the outside before coming right back in the middle of the track to hit the other wall, just when all the cars behind him picked up speed. Verstappen just escaped the collision, as did Nico Hülkenberg. But the Force India driver had hit a piece of Raikkonen's car that had flown in the air, and he might have some damage. Seeing that, the race was stopped. Then the race direction gave the impression of not knowing what to do. They tried to restart the event after a lengthy stop, again by going under the safety car. But the rain was still intense and there was too much water for the wet weather Pirelli tires. The drivers were still vulnerable to aquaplaning, and the grip that they had on the track was minimal. After Raikkonen's accident, there was no way the direction would place the drivers at risk like that again. Still, the cars continued to run on the track behind the safety car while the officials searched for an answer as to what to do, and it was still raining hard. After 9 lost laps, the race direction realized it would be a better idea to stop the clock, and out came the red flag again. By rule, a race counts the number of laps needed to reach 305 kilometers or 2 hours of racing. The stage that is reached the most quickly determines the end of the race. Most of the time, it's the 305 kilometers that prevails, but when it rains, the race sometimes reaches the 2-hour time limit first. Now that the race had officially begun, the stopwatch continued to run, even with the cars idling behind the safety car. If things were to continue like this, the vast majority of the race would have been held behind the safety car, preventing the drivers from really racing. When the crowd understood what was happening, it became furious. It wanted to race. There was booing and heckling coming from the stands. Seeing that, Charlie Whiting took the right decision to stop the race on lap 29. let the rain pass, and then restart after things cleared up. After another lengthy stop, the safety car joined the track with the intention of finally restarting the race. On lap 32, it entered the pit, and the drivers could once again race. Hamilton, Rosberg, Verstappen, Sergio Perez on Force India, and Carlos Sainz on Toro Rosso leading the way. The order stayed the same as Hamilton sped it up. Verstappen tried the trick that he had done on Raikkonen at the start of the race on Rosberg, but the German was ready and closed that door. But that was for the first corner only. Verstappen was determined to take second place. He headed to the outside right when the car entered the small straight line between turns 3 and 4, Curva do Sol and Descida do Lago. Rosberg, who thought about the world title above everything else, decided to let him go. There was little to gain for him right now in a battle with the young Dutch driver. Even if Rosberg decided to take a pass at the challenge, this was still an incredible maneuver by Verstappen. At a time when the drivers looked like they were operating on ice, Verstappen gave the impression that he was running on a sunny race day on a perfectly dry track. This was impressive, but it was only the beginning of things to come. On lap 38, Verstappen continued to be the main attraction. He went full speed in the hope of catching Hamilton. He was around 2 seconds behind the leader. Since the beginning of the race, he was about the only driver who dared to run on the curb around the track. All others preferred to play it safe and avoid them. On a wet track, the curbs are as slippery as they could be. When he's at turn 14, Verstappen touched them like he had done on all the other laps. But this time, he paid the price. The Red Bull went into a spectacular spin, but almost miraculously escaped making contact with the wall. This happened at a spot right where the track was larger due to the entrance of the pit lane. The young driver was able to regain the control of his car, and he continued on his way. Verstappen would evaluate this as a 50-50 moment. He could very well have ended his race right there, but luck and undoubtedly skill were on his side. Rosberg was good but mostly lucky as he was able to avoid hitting the Red Bull car. But Verstappen's spin opened the door for the German, and maybe he could benefit from it by retaking second place. Both drivers were now side by side at the start-finish line with Verstappen on the inside, keeping his spot. Rosberg could have been fiercer, but he clearly played for the title first. After that, things calmed down for a while. On the 43rd lap, Hamilton had an 8.8 second lead on Verstappen and an 11.5 second lead on Rosberg. For the British driver, this race was easier than it looked. Each time he was allowed to race as fast as he could, he undoubtedly distanced his pursuers, Rosberg being the first. Hamilton was never under pressure during this race. He would say that he was in his zone since the beginning. He then added that his victory in Silverstone in 2008 was way more difficult than this one. Sensing that the weather could become clearer, Red Bull called on Verstappen to put on the intermediate tires, this on lap 44. Although not a sure thing, the team tried to give their driver an edge. Who knows, maybe that could allow them to steal the victory from the hands of Mercedes. Or at least, a second place. By now, it was evident that Rosberg was only trying to reach the end. He did not press whatsoever. He was now 18 seconds behind Hamilton and surely did not bother to fight Verstappen again if they were together again on the track. But for Rosberg, we understand his concern when a lap later, he almost lost control of his car at the exit of turn 12 at a corner named Junchao. A retirement would have been devastating for the German driver at this juncture. Happily for him, he was able to regain control just in time and continue. It was still a very difficult race for most of the drivers. There was more proof that the conditions tended to make driving very difficult on lap 48 when Massa lost control of his Williams and hit the wall at the entrance of the pit. Again, the safety car entered the play. Massa then came out of his car and greeted the crowd. Even with his helmet on, you could feel the love between the driver and his countrymen present at the circuit that day. Massa placed his hand on his heart to make sure everyone who cheered and applauded him knew where he stood towards them. He also took a Brazilian flag and waved it to the crowd and kept it for the long walk towards his garage. This already touching moment would become even more so when Massa reached pit lane on foot. Like earlier, it was closed while the stewards took Massa's car away. This allowed everyone in the pit to form a guard of honor for the driver as he walked along the garage of the different teams. Keep in mind that at the time, each person thought, including Massa, that this was his next to last race in his illustrious career. Massa's wife, Anna Rafaela, and son, Filipino, reached the driver and they hugged together. Then, all of Massa's emotions came pouring out as he burst into tears in the arms of both his wife and son. Formula One is often a place where feelings don't prevail, where the faint of heart should refrain. Not this time. The situation gave the crowd and the people in the garage an opportunity to show their appreciation, love, and respect for a specific driver. And that they did. To see Massa waving his home flag to his fans, being cheered and applauded by the crowd for his brilliant career, and by the people in pit lane to finally see him succumb to his emotions created an unforgettable moment in recent F1 history. Even the fact that Massa would be back in a Williams car a couple of weeks later when Valtteri Bottas would depart for Mercedes following Nico Rosberg's own retirement did not make this moment irrelevant. Massa loved and was loved by the F1 universe, and it was magnificent that they were able to tell each other without having to speak a word. All this drama happened while the race was still under the safety car. This was the moment Red Bull recognized that they had made a mistake by going on the intermediate tires. When they asked Verstappen what he thought of the idea of continuing with these tires or come back to the pit to place the full wet tires, he simply said that with the intermediates, we're waiting for a crash to happen. Ricciardo pitted first on lap 53 with Verstappen heading in on lap 55. This additional pit stop was costly for the 19-year-old as he fell to 16th place on the track when he rejoined the race. For an average F1 driver, this could significantly end their hopes and aspirations. But Verstappen was not your typical driver. He was a phenom taking shape before our very eyes, a world champion to be, a man who, when placed behind the wheel, was capable of incredible things. If there was still any doubt remaining over the vastness of Verstappen's skills, the Dutchman would make sure to put them to rest during the last 16 rounds of this race. On lap 56, the safety car entered the pit lane for good. This was the last time that we would see that car on the afternoon, and the race could proceed unimpeded. Hamilton, Rosberg, Sergio Perez on Force India, Sainz, and Vettel are the top five. Unlike Verstappen, Perez is too far when the drivers speed up while passing the start-finish line to attempt something on Rosberg. The German driver's second position was safe. It was a good thing for Rosberg because he had only one concern at the time, reaching the finish line and maintaining his lead on the World Championship intact. He would not challenge Hamilton for the win. There would only be one thing to follow between that time and the end of the race. That was Verstappen's incredible comeback. As soon as the safety car was gone, Verstappen started to do his thing. In just one lap, he overtook the three cars of Kevin Magnussen, Esteban Gutierrez, and Pascal Wehrlein to be in 13th place. Valtteri Bottas was recognized as a good driver under the rain, while Verstappen disposed of him in easy fashion by going on the outside of the corner, now finding himself behind his teammate Ricciardo in 11th place. Sure, Verstappen benefited from being in potentially the second-best car on the grid. That alone could explain how easily he overtook his competitors until that point. But now that he was behind his teammate, it was an entirely different story. If he were to overtake Ricciardo with the same ease that he did on Bottas, it would send a strong message, an electric one, to the F1 universe. At the time, Ricciardo was behind Daniel Kvyat on a Toro Rosso. Yes, the same Kvyat who was dropped by Red Bull earlier in the season to make space for Verstappen. Ricciardo continued to play it safe while Verstappen was in a hurry to overtake him. The conditions were very difficult and the drivers had trouble staying on the track. Well, everyone except Verstappen, who looked like there were no worries present. It was as though he could not understand why the others were so slow. It was on their 59th lap that Verstappen did something on Ricciardo that was mightily impressive. He went on the outside of turn 11, a rounding curve called Mergulo that led to a short straight. The intention was to surprise him. It worked. Ricciardo took his corner as usual under the rain with a certain cautiousness when he saw his teammate now completely beside his car when he was about to take his line for the next corner. Ricciardo was trapped. He had no choice to let Verstappen, who was faster, go in front of him in order to escape a collision. Verstappen was still young and a raw driver, but to realize a maneuver like that on an experienced fellow, a race winner like Ricciardo, in the same car, both with fresh tires, was simply splendid. It was nothing less than exceptional. But Verstappen was not done. In turn 1, in the Senna S's in the 60th lap, he overtook Kvyat easily. Meanwhile, Ricciardo was still stuck behind the Toro Rosso. Next up, a newcomer, Esteban Ocon, in a Manor Grand Prix. Verstappen was in total control. He often headed outside of the race line to gain time on his opponents. And when he came close again to paying the price in turn 14, that's when he almost lost it, he was able to maintain control while continuing catching Ocon. Again, Verstappen's skills were a great help. It may only be a Manor car in front of him, but Verstappen would perform another exceptional maneuver to overtake Ocon by going on the outside at turn 10, a tight hairpin called Bico de Pato. Quite simply, Verstappen was in a class of his own at this point. Meanwhile, Ricciardo overtook Kvyat to take 10th place on lap 62, but it was too late for the Australian. He paled in comparison to Verstappen in these conditions. In fact, everyone paled, while the Dutch driver completed laps 2 seconds faster than everyone else, and he continued his quest by overtaking Sauber's Felipe Nasser for 7th place at the same time. On the 66th lap, Verstappen overtook Hülkenberg for 6th place. Remember that less than 10 laps before, he was in 16th position. Verstappen was so fast, he caught every car in front of him in just a few corners. As soon as he overtook Hülkenberg, he was right behind Vettel at the Senna S's. He tried to surprise the 4-time world champion in the straight leading to turn 4, but he was on the outside, and the Ferrari driver said, "Not on my watch." Verstappen then headed back to the outside on turn 10 at Bico de Pato, but it was no longer a Manor vehicle in front of him, and for now, Vettel stayed in front. After going again on the outside of the race line coming out of the curve, the line Verstappen took allowed him to be on the inside of Vettel when they arrived at Zhangzhou, the corner that leads to the section when cars speed up on their way up the hill to the start-finish line. This time, Vettel could do nothing to prevent being overtaken. Vettel insisted, but Verstappen did not flinch. He even left the apex a little bit, forcing the Ferrari on the grass, which could have been disastrous. That put Vettel in a serious disadvantage at a time when both cars had to speed up. Verstappen was on the inside and faster than Vettel. He now takes 5th place. Vettel complained of being pushed off the track with a certain cause, but that changed nothing. Verstappen was magnificent again, and all who witnessed his driving knew that it was simply a matter of time before he overtook the Ferrari. Now that he was done with Vettel, Verstappen pursued Sainz, whom he would catch at the turn 4 of the 67th lap. Sainz did not even try to block him, and Verstappen was now in 4th. It was incredible. The race that the Dutch driver ran was the stuff of legend. Comparisons with Senna and Schumacher no longer seemed out of place. Verstappen was now on Perez's tail. The Brazilian was 3 seconds ahead of him, but Verstappen gained 2 of them in just 1 lap. While Verstappen impressed everyone, Ricciardo was still stuck in 8th place. In front, Hamilton remained with a sizable lead on Rosberg. On lap 69, Verstappen had caught Perez. If he went in front of the Force India driver, he would be on the podium. Verstappen showed that he is serious on Perez on turn 1 and 4, but the Brazilian was still a little bit too far to try something. But at the hairpin that is turn 10, he was close enough to the Force India car. Perez protected the inside of the corner, so Verstappen went to the outside, as he had previously done on Esteban Ocon earlier in the race. The fact that he was faster than Perez allowed him to be side by side with the Mexican when they both went through the curve. Perez and Verstappen were now running together on the track. Verstappen was able to keep control of his car even if he was completely on the curb at the corner. That was for less than a second, but it was more than enough to lose it. He did not. Both the Force India and the Red Bull cars were side by side going into Mergulo. They stayed like that through the corner. They were now on their way to Zhangzhou, where Verstappen had put Vettel off the track a couple of laps before. But the fact that the Dutch driver was on the outside of the hairpin, combined with his superior speed along the corners, had allowed him to take the inside at both the Mergulo and Zhangzhou corners. By then, Perez was unable to do anything. Verstappen was able to keep the apex, and that was the way he took 3rd place out of the Mexican's hands. What a show Verstappen was giving on this day. It was a magnificent drive, a fairy tale drive, nothing less. Simply a man in a class of his own. Meanwhile, Hamilton still led easily on Rosberg. Having controlled the race all the way in very difficult conditions, Hamilton would win in Brazil for the first time in his career. Rosberg was second, so the title would be decided in the last race of the season in Abu Dhabi, but that was for later. For now, Verstappen finished third, and all the spotlights were directed towards him, and deservedly so. He ran an incredible race. I didn't know where I was on the track coming out of the pit, Verstappen would remember when he was in fact 16th. I started to pass people, and it was very difficult. I couldn't see where I was going on the straight, and at such a high speed, it's not nice. But we managed to pass a lot of them. On that day, Verstappen made driving in the rain look ordinarily easy. That in a race where so many of his colleagues with much more experience as drivers would spin out or hit walls. He even made us forget the brilliant Hamilton victory under terrible conditions. If there were any lingering doubts about the potential of this youngster, Verstappen had erased them all in this race. Afterwards, Red Bull team boss Christian Horner would say that, "I think we just witnessed something very special." That was an understatement. To claw back 12 places in 16 laps was more than something special. It was an incredible accomplishment. No one could have imagined this at lap 56, but Verstappen was able to make it happen. Even today, with all the wins under his belt, this could be his best performance of his F1 career. Yes, Hamilton and Rosberg had kept their chances for the title, but the race is remembered for Verstappen. Quite simply, a legendary performance. For this race, the author has been helped by watching the race on the Quebec network RDS, race report from Motorsport magazine journalist Mark Hughes, watching footage from the race on the F1 TV app, website Stats F1, race report by Autosport journalist Ed Straw, a book titled Unstoppable, the ultimate biography of Max Verstappen by the same Mark Hughes. For executive producer Simon Bachand, I'm Jeremy Safran for A Race to Remember, Brazil 2016.